back to the White Coat Club. My name is Lindsay and I am a counselor at Moon Prep. And today we are going to be talking about writing the BSMD supplementals. Before we get into the good stuff, don't forget to like and subscribe to get more BSMD and medical school admissions advice. Now, to help you with writing of your BSMD supplementals, I have Nicole with me, as well as a new guest with us, Linda. So Linda, before we jump into the content, will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to meet everyone over this podcast. I am currently a dermatology resident in Philadelphia, but my journey to medicine has had a lot of twists and turns. When I was in high school, I applied to basically all of the BSMD programs, got into a bunch, but then decided not to go to one because I was honestly scared about the commitment. Then in my undergrad, I applied to early acceptance MD programs and did get into them, and then also was scared to commit. And then finally, at the end of my undergrad, I was like, okay, I'm ready to commit, and eventually applied to MD PhD programs, finished that program, and am now a resident. Throughout this whole process, I've loved to kind of help people think about things like supplemental essays for BSMD programs, have mentored a lot of students at different points in my training. So when I was in college, I helped high school students. When I was in medical school, I helped college students. And I'm so happy to be a part of Moon Prep and to be kind of part of this discussion today.
Perfect. We're glad you're here with us. All right. So let's talk a little bit about BSMD prompts. And I know, at least for me personally, the one that always comes to my head first is that, like, why medicine essay? Just about every single BSMD program offers it or requires students to write this. I would say it usually varies in length from like anywhere from like 250 words to about 500 words. But this is really one of the more common questions that BSMD programs will ask. So first, Nicole, can you kick us off and tell us a little bit about some of the things that you tell students to include in this essay?
Yeah. So if it's just a plain why medicine, because, we'll get into a little bit later, but some are asking kind of multiple questions within that question. But you're really wanting to showcase to the staff kind of what was that moment for you that you knew that this was the path that you wanted to go on. And then what are some examples of what you've done in the last couple of years during your high school experience to really continue on that path or just start? To solidify for you. Maybe you had the idea that medicine could be a good idea. So what did you do to solidify that? And then what did you learn from that experience as well? And kind of what did you learn about yourself really?
I think that's the most important thing too, because sometimes kids will like talk really surface level about activities. Like just about all of our BSMD students have shadowed or volunteered in a hospital. And so they'll kind of talk like really, or done research and they'll talk like really generically about these activities, but they forget about like connecting it with like their desire to become a physician and like their values or whatever it might be. And so um, sometimes I have kids who ask me like, well, how do I make myself stand out? And that's exactly it. Like kind of like the why behind why you did these activities or like their impact on you. So that's like I think one of the biggest and most important things to include.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in here, I think um, it can be, it's not that important to come up with something that is like the most unique or the most special. These programs are reading hundreds of applications, and with all these hundreds of applicants, it's very likely that you had a similar, reason to apply to BSMD programs as someone else. So I wouldn't stress trying to find like the most unique, kind of crazy, standout actual experience. But just like Lindsay and Nicole were saying, it's about the passion and about your own journey and your understanding of whatever experience that was. And so something as simple as, having a family member who had a lot of health problems and how you dealt with it, or how you were involved in taking care of them and what that taught you about the healthcare system and et cetera, can be very, very powerful, even though it's not, a super unique experience, unfortunately, to have a sick family member.
Yeah, I feel like it's more important to talk about like maybe how it maybe what's the right word? Encourage you to do other activities after that. Like maybe if you did have like I've had several students who like had a sibling who had autism or had the student's sibling had like severe allergies or they themselves had like a kind of a severe health condition. And so what do they do after it, I think is kind of key. So like, for example, I had one girl who has like eczema. And so that was something she really struggled with a lot as a child, and honestly still continues on, still has to get like monthly treatments for it. And so like that caused her to do some research related to like skin products and like what would be good for people with eczema and what works and what doesn't work. So it like led to a bigger action that led to like a kind of healthcare journey in general. So I think that that's like the important thing to.
Yeah, I love that. That's something I tell people all the time is to, in your essay, you want to demonstrate that you have curiosities, interests, goals, and that you take steps to realize them or explore more. And so something I always try to, instead of just saying, I did this research program, the kind of wording or the vibe should be like, I was so excited about XYZ. And so then I sought out, the specific opportunity that I thought would be so perfect for my interests. And then I did that, which kind of shows that you are motivated, you are excited to go do stuff, and that you will like follow through on these kind of interests that you have.
Kind of leaves us like, oh, go for it, Nicole.
No, I was going to say exactly, they want to see the connection that you were able to make.
That leads us like kind of perfectly to the next point about like what not to include in your essay. And I think lack of passion is like the biggest mistake that I see kids making. Like we can always tell when it's not necessarily the student themselves that are super passionate about medicine, but instead it's kind of more parent driven. And that comes across sometimes in like the language that they're using and like, how far they've taken their activities. But if, they have 1,000 applicants that they get to pick from, like, why would they pick the kid who doesn't seem like they're all that interested in even pursuing medicine? BSMD programs are anywhere from 6 to 8 years. It's a big commitment, and kind of exactly what Linda was talking about in her like intro of herself. It is kind of a scary commitment, and it does require a lot of thought, and it isn't a decision that should be taken lightly. And so I think that kids and parents sometimes kind of forget that passion is a really big part of it. If you're not passionate about it, like it will kind of chew you up and spit you back out without you being able to be successful. Nicole, what's some other things that you try and avoid in these why medicine essays?
So there's definitely some things. I know Linda mentioned if you have a family member that's been sick, and that's totally, it's not a unique situation, unfortunately, but we don't want to almost turn it into like a woe is me, so I should be a doctor and like I'm deserving because of something that has happened to me or my family. We also have a lot of students who have done shadowing experiences, and all they want to do is talk about kind of what they saw as in terms of, I got to see an open heart surgery, or I got to do sutures, and they're less focusing on what they learned about themselves and what they learned about the profession, and more on like the quote unquote like cool medical things that they got to see, which it's not going to be as impactful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that is, I said before that you don't have to have some, crazy, unique reason for why medicine, but it is all about how you spin that and how you show yourself through it. So just saying, I had a sick family member and now I know that medicine is important, without kind of going into how did that experience trigger your journey to medicine that is ending up in you applying to BSMD program. So without that middle section, it can come off very generic and say, hey, I had a sick family member, now I'm going into medicine. It's that middle part that gives it the character and gives it the emotion and the passion, and sort of makes that your essay versus like an essay that could belong to anybody.
Yeah. I had one kid who, her grandmother, she was in India, but had like a heart, I forget exactly what the health condition was. But anyway, she went to like her primary care physician that was closer, and they told her that she needed to go get like treatment at like one of the bigger hospitals. But, they didn't necessarily hurry there. They didn't realize that they needed to get there like right then and there, because like that wasn't necessarily conveyed. So they like took their time driving there. And when they got there, it ended up being like a much scarier situation than it necessarily needed to be. And so that got my student really passionate about, just emergency care. And she got really heavily involved in like Stop the Bleed here in the United States. And so it kind of, it spurred her into bigger action, which I think is like a really important part, is like that kind of spurred her actions and then like became a part of her bigger goal about not only like why she wanted to become a doctor, but like kind of like what type of doctor she wanted to be and what type of things she wanted to be involved in, which I thought was like just a good way to connect everything.
And some schools really focus on that too, depending on like location. I know Augusta, for example, I mean, they're really only looking for students that have that rural medicine, like being that level one trauma center and having that experience in rural areas, with like the need for, like you said, with that student, sometimes emergency rooms are not 5-10 minutes away like they are, in more urban areas. So having a student that's had that type of experience and really knows it firsthand, students are going to be much more competitive for that type of program than someone who may have only experienced, city living and city medical experiences and doesn't like understand the capacity as to what that means.
Oh, one thing I was going to say that I personally don't really love too much is like talking about how you have like a strong affinity towards science and that being like the majority of your essay. That, you did really great in AP bio or chemistry and telling us like all the things that you learned in those classes. And like, that's why you should become a doctor. I mean, of course, like being good at science and, being academically strong is a part of it. But what does that really show us beyond like, we don't really learn anything more about the student beyond what we already saw in their transcripts. We probably saw you got A's in your AP chemistry and AP bio class, maybe got a 4 or 5 on the exam. So we know that you're a strong science student. So like we're not necessarily learning anything more about you. So I think that kind of comes back to like the generic stories and not necessarily digging deeper into things. Because of course, being a doctor is much more than just being good at science. The people skills and like that passion, I think, needs to come through. And that can be hard if you're just talking about your classes.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that if you're going to talk about science, then the thing that kind of would be better to focus on instead of classes is like maybe you did a really cool summer research program. And, that's how you can incorporate the sort of, if you want to talk about affinity towards science or really liking science or medical science, I think talking about classes on its own, for a majority of the essay can be, like Lindsay said, it just doesn't add anything and it doesn't make you stand out in any way because a lot of these students applying these programs have all done very well in their classes.
Mhm. And like you were kind of forced to take your AP, not forced to take AP bio per se, but you had to hit certain classes anyway. You had to have 3 years of science, 4 years of science to graduate high school. So at that point, you were just doing kind of the minimum of what was expected of you. Or of course, if you're taking APs, you are kind of going a little bit above and beyond, but taking like that research program or taking, that interest outside of the classroom, that's ultimately how you can really show that passion and interest. Now, what do you all think about including like international shadowing experiences or volunteering experiences or comparing the American system to like an international system?
I think this is really tricky, and it's all about context. In general, with these essays, I think that if someone is passionate about including a topic, there's usually a way to incorporate it in a way that's very powerful, that we can definitely help with, or anyone can help them with. But I think it's tricky because you don't want to make it seem like you just went, you went to another country and you observed and write about that and, that's kind of it. I think you'd wanna use it in the context of, like, your larger story.
Mhm.
So, again, like, emphasizing why you wanted to go to that international location or what was important to you about it or what you were hoping to achieve out of it would make that an example of something like that. For example, let's say that someone was had an issue with access to care. Maybe, you know, again, and I hate to lean on family examples, but those I think are common for a lot of people. So let's say that you have a family member who is unable to get care because they just don't speak the language of what's going on. And so that really got you interested in, trying to work with populations who don't necessarily like speak the language. And then because of that, you went to South America or something and had this international experience and it taught you XYZ and it made you realize that, you could do things like this as a doctor in the US as well. I think that kind of is an example of a way of using that experience in a really powerful way. I don't know what you guys think.
I agree. I think that my advice is really similar to yours, that it can be totally fine. Like the example I gave earlier about her grandmother going through like that health scare in another country. It worked well for like her greater story. And it wasn't really about like the international like healthcare system either, or really about that in general. It's just kind of like the catalyst for other things. And so honestly, when I'm like suggesting younger students too, if they ask, it's okay to like shadow in another country. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I don't want that to be the majority of their experiences. I do think it's important to have experiences here in the States too, and diverse experiences. And they can be included, and like sometimes it is like a really valid and like really eye-opening experience. But yeah, it depends on what other opportunities they might have had and how it fits into their overall narrative.
I agree. I feel like I have a lot of students who have done it. They're going to visit family and they're going to want to just like take advantage of their summer while they're there instead of, not doing anything else. It's kind of like the best thing they could do at that moment. But definitely not as the primary or the only shadowing experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the comparing, it gets a little bit tricky as well.
Yeah.
When they've had two experiences, one internationally and then one, nationally, it is tricky when they start to compare. So just really being thoughtful in how you're comparing or talking about your experiences.
Completely agree. Yeah. It can be done well, just like with every single topic. Like when we talk about personal statements, what can be a good topic and what would be a bad topic. There's not one automatic bad topic or one automatic thing to stay away from, as long as it, is really specific to you and important to your story, it could potentially be included. Do you guys have any favorite examples of a Why Doctor essay that you want to share? No, we've shared a few so far.
I have a similar one to kind of what you mentioned before. Student sibling with autism or on the autism spectrum has always experienced it, has like been, in the doctor's offices and in the centers with them firsthand, and then has truly just dedicated their high school experience to learning more about ASD. And every single research experience and shadowing experience he's done has been in that field. And he has a true passion for going into, neuroscience specifically, as a physician. And then he also is able to take his other passions and weave them into therapies for ASD. So he's done a lot, and it's all very, very cohesive, which I like. And that's not always the case for everyone. Not everyone's going to know exactly what they want to do. Some of it is so important just to explore, and maybe you've shadowed 5 different types of specialties because you're just not positive. And that's okay too. Not everyone has to have that, but I did really enjoy the cohesiveness of his application.
Yeah, one example, I can think of 2 examples. One that is related to a family member, which is that someone had a grandma who was losing her vision, and and this person also was kind of like a translator because the grandma didn't necessarily speak English. And so she was kind of the bridge between her grandma, even though, it's when you go to a medical office, they usually have translators, but sometimes, when you go home, your family member may or may not really, have understood what was going on. So she kind of at a young age took on this, this role of someone who was helping her grandma navigate losing her vision. And, her from this experience, kind of understanding what are the, how a physician can help someone come to grips with a very, scary idea of losing your vision. And what I liked about it is that it really wasn't, um, you know, it wasn't, this kind of um, groundbreaking novelty, and it was a very common experience, but it was clear that this person was very, emotionally affected by what was going on and was going to use that experience to help others. And I thought that was so powerful.
Love it. I also have a couple examples. One was from a few years ago, and this student was like very like analytical about how he approached it. So like all of his essays were kind of like you can almost see the formula that he was going with beforehand if you kind of look carefully. And for him, it was like doctor is like a combination of like being a teacher and a researcher, because researching was like really important to him. And so that's kind of like what he was looking to get into in medicine. So probably comes to no surprise that he was getting into programs like the RPI BSMD program, because research was such a heavy aspect. But he kind of talked about how the combination of these two is what makes medicine so perfect to him, and connected his own activities to being a teacher, and what he saw in his shadowing experiences too about seeing the doctor as his teacher, Same thing for researching, talked a lot about his research that he had done in his past and like his future goals too, about what he might want to do. So he really aligned it really well, I think, with what he wanted to achieve in the future and like kind of the qualities of medicine that were really what was drawing him to the field. And then I had another one that was a lot more like, I think, personable. This student was a lot more creative. Like his essays were honestly some of the best I've ever read at Moon Prep. And he had a ton of interviews. And I think it was because he did like kind of talk in such like a human, like personable way. And like you could just like feel like the love and care kind of coming off of him, which I think was really important. But for him, it was all about like how like medicine is about like a book of stories, and like throughout his different experiences, he's become like a good listener and like wants to help the patients, continue to write their stories and have a happy, ending. And so he had like a couple examples from, when he was volunteering, seeing a patient at the beginning of their life getting born throughout like a really kind of scary health scare. And then, from volunteering at like a camp for kids with cancer, how he was able to connect with students or the campers there, and kind of about the different things that he helped them with, like writing their story. So it was just like a very, very personal essay, I would say. So there's no like one, I guess like the moral of my story too, and I think what we've all been saying and like all these examples we've given is there's no like one right way to do this. It could be more creative. It could be more straightforward. You could have like a very pointed message. You could be a little bit more general if you don't know what your future goals are. So there's no one right or wrong way.
Yeah, and I can think of one other example of an essay I read that I loved, which um, this student was very into dance and had made dance a big part of their life, but also was applying to medical school, and kind of wrote about how, she had some experiences, got her interested in medicine, but kind of tied the training that she and the kind of, psychological um, efforts that she had to make into becoming a really good dancer, including like a lot of, hard work, practice, like making sure things are done well, and then responding to feedback, and like all of these kind of lessons that she learned, and how she could see herself applying these lessons to being like this particular type of doctor. And I thought that was really powerful as well.
Okay, let's move on to then the other, I would say like really common essay type. And this could be kind of in combination with the why medicine essay, but a lot of programs will ask like why this program. And it'll be worded in a few different ways. Like it might be worded, like I think Drexel's is more like, why do you want to be a doctor? And why do you want to be studying at like Drexel College of Medicine? And Penn State is more like, why Penn State, why an accelerated program, and, like why the BSMD program in general. So making sure that you read the prompt is really key to making sure you're answering it correctly. But whenever you're helping students with this one, Nicole, what do you kind of think about with why this program essay?
We definitely want to be as specific as possible. And then, we want to avoid just looking at their website and pulling important details. Now, obviously, if those are the facts and we want to talk about some of them, but why are they actually important to you? So instead of just saying, oh, well, your program has this specific type of research opportunity or research center that's, groundbreaking. Why does that matter to you? Have you done research similar? Are you interested in that kind of research? You just listing things that they have about them that are unique is not going to make a difference if you're not relating it back to you specifically. But we definitely want to be as specific as possible. What are your specific goals? How is this program going to get you there? I also tell some students, who are really struggling with, I don't really know how to write this. Almost imagine that you got into all of them. Why would you go here? Why is this program so special to you? That usually helps kind of with their framework.
Yeah, think about it kind of similar to like a why this school essay, where you're trying to connect goals to like what the program has. And so, yeah, specific is really key. Now, some of these programs like Penn State, for example, doesn't make students take an MCAT. Linda, do you usually advise your students to like mention that they don't take the MCAT when they're writing this essay?
I don't. It kind of that topic is the same as like location-based reasons, like, oh, I just really want to live in this city, for example. Um, those are things that I wouldn't, encourage people to mention. If there are ways to spin it, maybe you really do want to be in this city because it helps your goals in some way. Um, I think one way that you could spin, not having to take the MCAT is saying you can spend, let's say that you have very diverse interests and medical schools are interested in people with like interdisciplinary backgrounds. And there is, actually published data that people who major in the humanities, end up very compassionate physicians. If you're going to spin it in a way like, okay, I want to in college pursue all these other things that will help me become a physician, and not having to take the MCAT is a benefit because it allowed me to spend that time I would have spent studying for the MCAT, developing all of these skills or experiences. That's one way I've seen it done where it can be effective. But most of the time, I think it's not something you want to come out of the gate with. Like, this is the reason I want to come to this program. It can be
Com-
kind of one of the things that draws you there.
Completely agree. Yeah, it shouldn't be like the main reason is because you don't want it to seem like you're taking the easy way out. But yeah, how are you going to take advantage of that extra time you get because you don't have to be taking the MCAT is exactly what I suggest to students too. So yeah, I think that's great advice.
And so I love what Nicole said, because I do think as someone who's just trying to read websites and get a feel for how programs are different, it can kind of be like all these programs kind of sound the same. And it can be very overwhelming and feel like this task, like if you've never been visited that program, or you don't know anyone there, it can be very hard to say like, what is super, super unique about this program that I can write about? But focusing on what you want to do and what you would do there is such a good way to think about it. Um, you know, if they have a lot of researchers in XYZ field and you're interested in that field, you'd love to do research there, right? And the specificity of I want to do research in this field with at this program where there's like an institute for it is so much better than like, well, this program has a lot of research opportunities.
Agreed. And you could also be looking at potentially like the curriculum to see if it like fits your particular learning style and diving into areas like that. But yeah, try and be so specific with this one because otherwise it's going to read like everyone else's. Now, one thing I have had kids try to do in the past is like, for example, Case Western has like a very generic, like, why do you want to study medicine type question. I've had kids try and sneak in like a why Case Western, like College of Medicine. Nicole, do you usually advise kids to include like a why this program, why this College of Medicine in prompts that aren't specifically asking for it?
I don't like to. I feel like a lot of it is like following instructions. Um, if they're
Yeah.
saying something that's like extremely relevant, potentially we can weave it in, but I don't want that to be like a main talking point. If they're not asking you for that, I usually say rule of thumb, let's avoid it, or just kind of brisk past it if need be, like if it really makes sense, but typically no.
Completely agree. The following instructions is like the biggest key. And it seems like such a small little thing because you're like, well, I'm showing that I did my research and I'm showing that I did well, but it's like, but they didn't ask that. And like now maybe you're spending 100 words like in a different area that and then we don't get to learn more about you. So yeah, I completely
Exactly.
worth it.
And I don't think students think about it like that. I think they're like, oh, I could add this in too. And when you think about word count, especially for some of these shorter prompts, listen, I mean, if it's an 800 word prompt and we're looking for words and you have a really great point that you want to make, like, maybe we consider it.
Yeah.
But some of these shorter prompts, we don't want to start weaving things in, or I can use up space adding this part in. Well, that's not what they asked for. So I want to avoid it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And some of these prompts are so small. Like VCUs, for example, is like a what experience have drawn you to medicine, and it's 250 words. We're like fighting for our lives trying to get everything.
Yeah.
Those we don't want to be like wasting it with like why VCU College of Medicine.
Mm-mm.
Good. Now, Linda, let's dive into some of like the common themes we kind of see with these essays and what types of things they're looking for. What have you noticed as some of these common themes of like the BSMD supplemental essays?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big things I think about are a commitment to medicine. So, demonstrated experience with medicine, kind of just the vibe that you know what you're getting yourself into. Like you were signing up for 8 years of schooling, but then you have residency. This is like 15 years before you're going to like have a job and be able to actually practice. So, some sort of indication that you understand this and that you understand it's long, it's hard, and you're prepared for it. That's one theme. Another one is diversity and kind of cultural competence. So reflecting on your role in healthcare, any personal or educational experiences that you have had that give off, that show that you are you're coming into this with a perspective that's going to sort of advance a lot of medical schools' goals, which is diversity and cultural competence. And then another theme I think is kind of ethics and personal qualities. So showing, showing that you know what skills are needed to be successful in medicine, like empathy, communication, teamwork, and showing that you have those qualities and that because you have those qualities, you think that medicine would be a great place for you to be able to, practice those qualities and like help other people. And then other sort of themes include, having a showing how medicine kind of ties to has is like a natural kind of way for you to go based on, for example, your extracurriculars or your natural interests and your long-term goals. So yeah, those are the themes kind of I think of kind of, and they're very broad, and so there's a lot of room to work within them. And obviously there are like other themes that aren't the ones I mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes schools will have a lot of prompts. Like I know Brown kind of exploded with their prompts this year, and they might cover a lot of these different themes of, what kind of causes are you really passionate about? Like, tell us about a time when you interacted with someone that was different from you, or like what kind of impact will you have on campus or on the medical field in general. So, a lot of those kind of like reoccurring themes I think are really important. But Nicole, do you want to dive into like some of the schools with like the most prompts?
And can I just say, so
Yeah.
the reason that it's interesting to think about themes is because let's say you're a first year or a freshman in high school, and you kind of know you might be applying to BSMD programs with these like themes. You can kind of think about what experiences can I go after that would give me something actually to write about along these themes. And so thinking about trying to, for example, get experiences with like teamwork or with kind of diversity settings.
It's a great point. Like I know Nicole brought it up before, but like Mercer, for example, really wants to see kids with rural medicine experiences and like underserved populations and things like that. And if you don't have those types of experiences, it might be really, really hard to get noticed there. Other programs like RPI's physician scientist program, typically kids getting accepted there have got, some substantial research experience. VCU really wants to see kids with like a lot of like clinical exposure and stuff like that. And so if you are kind of committed to these fields and you are from Virginia and you're like, well, VCU is kind of like a natural school for me to want to go to, those might be things that you can be building towards with your resume kind of in mind from a young age. It's a great point. And even if you don't realize it until it's late, too, not too late, but like, later in the years too, like you can still be getting some of those like really valuable experiences to build your resume.
And it can help you kind of think about how to spin those experiences
Mhm.
on your application.
Definitely. Definitely. And actually to that end too, that's is why I just had like a call with a younger classman today, and she's only a freshman. She's gonna start volunteering, um, hopefully in a hospital this upcoming summer. She found one that like takes her based on her age. And so she might not remember some of these stories that she has, these experiences she has when she's, in ninth grade, 10th grade, when she's writing her essays as a senior. So one thing I do encourage all my BSMD students to do, and honestly, traditional students as well. But because we are writing so many essays, so many specific examples of leadership and diversity and, a challenge or, a cause that you're really passionate about. And of course, like your overall, like why medicine, having like this experience, diary that you're keeping will really help you just whenever you're trying to come up with more essay topics and things that are really unique to you, because it's hard to come up with all these different themes in the moment, and can maybe help you see kind of a narrative arc. If you notice there's kind of a lot of reoccurring themes in your own activity Rolodex that you're creating, that could be a good way about going in the future.
I agree. Tell students to journal as well.
Mhm. So speaking of all these prompts, Nicole, can you dive into some of these schools that do have a lot of prompts?
Yeah, so the one that sticks out, I think, to everybody the most is Brown. I think it's 10, responses. Now, some are super short, 3 words that describe you, some are 50 words in one sentence, but it is a lot. The stamina for that needs to really be robust, and you have to have a lot to talk about, even if it is just, a couple of things or a couple of words. Some others that have, 5 or more essays that are required, TCNJ, UMKC, University of Alabama, Birmingham, those are, I think Penn State had quite a few this year. I don't know if it was exactly 5, but
I had 4 this year.
yeah, but those are the ones that are kind of the bigger ones. But definitely my biggest one is Brown.
Yeah. Brown cannot be started. Like if you're doing regular decision, you should not be starting these over winter break. They should be started beforehand. Because they do take time. And even like those short little ones, like which 3 words describe you, or like you have like a 1 sentence to describe like why Brown, that could maybe take you longer than a 250 word essay, because you really have to make every single word count, quite literally. So, don't look at the prompt, and don't look at the word count and write it off thinking that you can do it in 10 minutes. You could
And
do
some
it.
prompts, if you're talking about the Brown regular decision in January, you've written already so many essays, which is kind of the next thing that we'll talk about. So you
Mhm.
might have some ideas, and you might have some themes, and some of it is, why are you interested in medicine? You're like, by that point, we've got this down pat. We know, what we want to talk about. It's just kind of altering it for Brown and altering it for the word count and things like that. But you've gotten more comfortable with those types of essays by that point. So a lot of students want to wait, like you said, till that Christmas break to do it, due by the first week in January, and it's definitely not advised.
No, you can do it, but you won't have as good of results as if you'd started earlier.
Exactly.
I guess to that end, when should you start writing, and maybe even first, when should you start planning, brainstorming, and then ultimately writing these essays?
Yeah. So, if you are a junior right now, it's definitely time to start thinking about things. Essays will be updated and applications open anytime after August 1st. Now, that doesn't mean you can't start planning ahead of time, and definitely brainstorming ahead of time, especially, with your just personal statements, get it out of the way, since you will have to write that for every school anyway. But you really want to take advantage of your summer as much as possible. As soon as you're done with school and after 11th grade is usually when I recommend, let's really start brainstorming. If they ask me this, what can we talk about? Maybe outlining, it's so fearful to start writing and perfecting essays if you're unsure if this is exactly what they're going to ask based on what they asked last year. But it definitely doesn't hurt to start planning, kind of an outline what you might want to talk about.
Especially because we know what you're going to have to write, like a why medicine essay. Like that's kind of non-negotiable. The little details might change, like if they want you to include why this program, or why an accelerated program, or things like that. But for the most part, you're gonna have to write a why doctor. So you can confidently start that, even if the prompts haven't been updated for the upcoming cycle.
Absolutely.
So yeah, personal statement for sure. I usually suggest that kids kind of brainstorm their personal statement and why doctor at the same time. Because a lot of the times kids do want to talk about their really important medical experiences in their personal statement. But then when they go to write their why doctor, there's nothing new to say. And so that would definitely be something that I tell them to think about. like that one example I gave earlier about the kid who wrote about like telling the story, like wanting to help the patients write the story, and talked about some volunteer experiences and some experiences as a camp counselor. His personal statement was actually a lot about medicine as well. He talked about being like on a rescue squad in the personal statement. And it turned out to be totally fine because he had so many other experiences. And he didn't even talk about his research experience that he had either in like either of those essays. And he talked about them in his like smaller supplementals. And so I know one of our coworkers, Michaela, is always like really hitting on the fact that students should have like kind of a essay map of everything that they need to write and figuring out where things are going to go before you even start writing. And that's really key too, just to make sure you do hit the most important stuff before your fingers hit the keyboard.
Yeah, it's never too early to start planning and start, just jotting down bullet points of something that was meaningful to you or you think you could flesh out later.
Yes. Now, how many essays do BSMD students typically write?
It's definitely going to depend on how many applications you are planning to submit.
Yes. And which schools? Because then we talked about Brown with their 10 essays.
Exactly. So I think the average, on average, if students are applying to about 25 schools with a mixture of BSMD programs in there. I mean, this year I've had as many as 117. I've had 90, one student had 99 essays. I've also had some students only have like 70, depending on schools they're applying to.
Completely agree. Yeah. And I guess we should say too, so people aren't like having panic attacks, is like it's not necessarily like 117 like unique essays or 99 unique essays. Like there is that repetition. But it is a lot of content generation they're putting forth first and then can reuse. And one thing I always joke with like new clients, it's like, right when you think you're done with all your essays, BSMD programs will send you more to do. So you're never done. Like for example, Hofstra in January typically sends like a supplemental application. I know NJMS and like RPI and the Albany Medical College schools will do that as well, send you more essays after the fact. So you're never done until you've been accepted or rejected, unfortunately. Now, one last thing, do BSMD programs typically look at the whole application? This is something that we get asked a lot, and it's a hard question to answer.
It is hard. And because I'm not sure if the answer is always very clear or always exact. A lot of kids will ask, if I talk about something in my personal statement or I talk about something in why this school, can I reuse it for why this program later on? Are they going to see both essays? I always rule of thumb, we don't want to submit the same thing twice. They could very well have your application. They may not have the rest of it. So I usually say no.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good rule of thumb to have. Like I know for TCNJ, like they kind of explicitly say on their supplemental application, like do not repeat anything you've sent us before. Whereas I know like the University of Arizona's BSMD program, they only look at the supplemental application, at least they have in years past. But I think it's better to be safe and not repeat anything than kind of hope that they haven't seen, like they're not going to see it. So don't reuse is I think my piece of advice.
And even some I call them like catchphrases. I don't know. I have some students, and I'm sure you have too, both of you, like they just have this one kind of sentence that you really love and we've reused in multiple places just because it fits really well with, what they want to say and their mission and their own personal kind of goals. But I always get very careful. We want to make sure we have not used this anywhere else in anything else they've sent you or any emails. So
yeah, I think that's key. It really is like a whole package you're sending over to them. So you want to make sure that you are curating it and sending unique items as much as possible. Okay, do we have anything else we want to add about like writing the BSMD supplementals?
I think, start early, plan early. Those essay maps that you mentioned prior are so helpful for students to really plan out what they want to say, and really just be thoughtful. Hopefully you have a ton of topics that you can pull from in terms of, your your experiences with medicine and things like that, but really be intentional behind what you're using for what school, do your research, and start early again. I think would be the number one.
That was exactly what I was going to say too. Start early. Start early. Do not start, if your deadline, and these deadlines come quick, like Penn State and UPenn are typically like, mid to early October. It comes real quick each year. So, and then they just start like whamming after you, like one after another or kind of all at once. And so you want to give yourself the full advantage. And we have seen that with Moon Prep students too, the ones who kind of put more thought and time into their essays. Will tend to just do better in the application process, just because they are able to convey themselves usually better.
Yeah. And it's definitely easy for admissions readers to tell if you spent a lot of time on this or not a lot of time on this.
Yes. And to us too, definitely to us too, but obviously our opinion matters a whole lot less. We're not the ones who are admitting you, but yeah, you can definitely tell a kid who just keyboard mashed about like 10 minutes before the meeting started versus a kid who really brainstormed, really thought about it, and then thoughtfully put together a response.
Yeah, and I think I just want to reiterate that these essays really are about these schools trying to get to know you and who you are and what you're passionate about and what you might do in the future. And that doesn't mean that you need to have like very unique life experiences to answer that question.
It's a great point. Yeah. Just have experiences at the end of the day. Ones that really influence why you want to be a doctor. And it doesn't matter if they are what everyone else has had. It's like the impact that they have on you, which makes it unique. Okay, so I think that is everything from us from the White Coat Club. Don't forget to hit subscribe before you leave. We will see you in a couple weeks though with some more BSMD and medical school admissions content.